He was already drifting away from her long before she ever saw him with another woman. The silence at their dinner table had started to feel louder than arguments, heavier than truth. Sarah Mitchell sensed it before she could name it, a fracture beneath polished smiles and polite conversations, a tremor running through the foundation of what she had believed was a stable marriage. That night in Chicago, the city shimmered like it always did in early autumn. Sharp wind cutting between high rises while lights reflected against the dark ribbon of the river. Sarah stepped out of her car in River North, smoothing down her navy coat over a tailored ivory dress, not extravagant, but quietly elegant, the kind of piece that whispered confidence instead of demanding it. She had just secured the largest contract of her career, a multi-state marketing expansion worth over $12 million, and her closest friends, Emily Carter and Lauren Davis, had insisted on celebrating properly. The restaurant they chose was the newest jewel in the district. All glass walls exposed brick and velvet booths, the kind of place where deals were signed over aged bourbon and reputations were quietly tested. Inside, the air buzzed with ambition. Waiters moved like choreography between tables. Jazz curled through the room in soft, seductive notes. Sarah smiled when she spotted Emily waving dramatically from a corner booth, Lauren already halfway through a glass of wine. They stood when she approached, embracing her with the fierce pride only long-term friendship could produce. 35 years old and finally where she had dreamed of being. Emily said, squeezing her hands. "You did it?" Sarah laughed, but there was a flicker in her eyes that neither friend missed, a quiet shadow that did not belong to success. Daniel Mitchell had not called to congratulate her. He had texted a brief good job around 5 in the evening, followed by a message saying he would be working late again. Lately had become every night. Late meetings, late calls, late returns with tired eyes and distracted responses. At 37, Daniel was rising quickly at his investment firm, and Sarah had once admired that hunger in him. Now it felt like distance, like an invisible wall built from silence and polite indifference. Lauren leaned closer across the table, studying her face the way only someone who knew her at 20 could. "Is he coming later?" she asked softly. Sarah shook her head once. "Work?" She said the word, tasting hollow. They ordered wine. They toasted. They laughed. For a while, Sarah let herself forget the growing chill at home, let the music wrap around her shoulders like warmth. She listened as Emily described her chaotic hospital shifts, as Lauren vented about her twins learning how to negotiate bedtime like corporate attorneys. Sarah felt present, almost light. Yet even in that warmth, her mind kept drifting to the empty side of her bed, to the way Daniel had flinched the last time she reached for his phone absent-mindedly, to the faint, unfamiliar perfume that had lingered on his jacket 2 nights ago. She had told herself she was imagining it. Successful women she knew were often accused of paranoia when they sensed betrayal. She refused to be that woman. She refused to doubt without proof. Across the restaurant, a man in a charcoal suit laughed too loudly at something his companion said. The sound cut through the room, sharp, familiar. Sarah did not look at first. She took another sip of wine instead, focusing on the way the glass trembled slightly between her fingers. Emily was mid-sentence when Lauren's eyes shifted over Sarah's shoulder and froze. "What is it?" Sarah asked, turning slowly, not expecting her world to tilt on its axis in that single motion. Daniel sat at a small table by the window, leaning forward, his expression softer than she had seen in months. The woman across from him was younger, mid-20s perhaps, long dark hair cascading over a fitted red dress. She touched his wrist as she laughed. He did not pull away. In fact, he smiled in a way that felt intimate, unguarded, a version of him Sarah had not seen in a very long time. Time fractured. The jazz slowed into something distant and distorted. Sarah's heartbeat pounded in her ears, each pulse deliberate, punishing. Emily reached for her hand beneath the table. Lauren whispered her name, but Sarah did not blink. She watched the angle of Daniel's body, the way it curved toward the other woman, the way his phone lay face down on the table, as if it no longer needed to be hidden. In that moment, the room did not see the accomplished executive who had just secured a multi-million-dollar contract. They would have seen a woman sitting very still, very quiet, in a simple ivory dress. A woman underestimated by strangers, mistaken for fragile by those who did not know her. But inside her something cold and calculating awakened. She was not powerless. She never had been. And though no one in that restaurant understood it yet, this night would not end with humiliation. It would end with revelation. Daniel did not know he was being watched. He leaned closer to the woman in red. His voice low, his expression softened into something intimate, something almost boyish. Sarah had not seen that look directed at her in months. The woman laughed again, tilting her head, fingers brushing Daniel's sleeve with deliberate familiarity. It was not accidental. It was not professional. It was practiced. Emily's grip tightened around Sarah's hand under the table. Lauren inhaled sharply, already halfway out of her seat. "Say the word," Lauren whispered, anger blazing in her eyes. "We will walk over there right now." But Sarah remained still, her spine straight, her face composed in a way that felt almost unnatural. The air around her seemed to crystallize, every sound sharpening into painful clarity. The clink of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the pulse in her throat. Her mind began assembling evidence with ruthless efficiency. The unexplained charges on their joint credit card labeled client dinners. The way Daniel had started showering immediately after coming home. The password change on his laptop 2 months ago. The quiet defensiveness whenever she asked simple questions. She had dismissed each detail separately, trusting the man she had built a life with. But now those fragments snapped together like glass forming a blade. Daniel reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind the woman's ear. It was a small gesture, almost tender, and that was what made it unbearable. Sarah felt something tear inside her. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. A realization. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a coincidence. This was history in motion. Emily rose halfway. "This is disgusting," she muttered. "He is sitting 20 feet away from you." Lauren's voice trembled with fury. "He thinks you will never see it." That thought pierced deeper than the image itself. Daniel believed he was safe. He believed she was naive. He believed she would never look beyond the surface. Sarah slowly lifted her wine glass, her hand steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "Do not," she said quietly, her tone firm enough to stop both friends. "Not here. Not like this." Emily stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot just sit here." "Yes, I can," Sarah replied, and there was something new in her voice, something steel-edged and deliberate. A public explosion would satisfy their outrage, but grant Daniel the gift of chaos, of deflection, of emotional confusion. Sarah did not want confusion. She wanted clarity. Across the room, Daniel's expression shifted for a fraction of a second, as if some instinct warned him. His eyes scanned the restaurant lazily. They passed over her table without recognition. He did not see her. The realization struck with unexpected force. He did not see her anymore in any sense of the word. Not her exhaustion, not her achievements, not her loneliness. He had already removed her from the center of his world. The woman in red leaned closer, whispering something that made Daniel smile again. Sarah noticed the details now with chilling calm. The way he mirrored the woman's body language, the way he angled his chair toward her. This was not a first meeting. This was comfort, routine, investment. Lauren's anger softened into something closer to sorrow as she looked at Sarah's face. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. Sarah placed the glass down with controlled precision. "I am thinking that I will not give him the satisfaction of watching me fall apart," she said. "I am thinking that I deserve better than a scene in a restaurant. I am thinking that this is not the night I lose myself." The music swelled briefly as if the room itself sensed the shift. Sarah allowed herself one final look. Daniel laughed again, unaware that the ground beneath him had already cracked. In that moment, something inside Sarah changed permanently. The pain was real sharp immediate, but beneath it lay something colder and more powerful. Decision. She reached for her purse and stood slowly. Emily and Lauren rose with her, forming a quiet wall of support. No tears fell. No dramatic confrontation erupted. Instead, Sarah walked toward the exit with her head high, the city lights reflecting against the glass doors ahead. Behind her, Daniel remained seated, believing the night belonged to him. He had no idea that he had just handed his wife the one thing more dangerous than anger. He had given her certainty. And certainty in the hands of a woman who had built empires from strategy and silence was far more powerful than any accusation shouted across a crowded room. The cold air outside struck Sarah's face like a verdict. Chicago at night did not soften its edges. The wind cut clean through silk and composure alike, yet she welcomed the sting. It grounded her. Behind her, the restaurant doors closed with a muted hush sealing in the laughter, the music the version of her life that had ended without warning. Emily reached for her arm, Lauren hovering close, both ready to steady her if she faltered. She did not. Her steps were measured, deliberate heels, striking pavement in a rhythm that felt almost defiant. They walked half a block before anyone spoke. Traffic roared past in streaks of white and red light, strangers rushing toward destinations that still made sense. "How long do you think it has been going on?" Lauren finally asked, her voice tight with restrained anger. Sarah did not answer immediately. Her mind was replaying months in rapid succession, not emotionally now, but analytically, as though she were reviewing campaign data. The business trips that multiplied, the guarded phone, the sudden gym membership. She inhaled slowly. Long enough, she said, long enough that this was not a mistake. This was a choice. Emily stopped walking. "We can go back in there. We can confront him. She deserves to know who she is sitting with." Sarah turned to her friend, eyes clear, almost eerily calm. "No. If I confront him tonight, he will lie. He will cry. He will spin a story about loneliness and stress, and I will be expected to react, to perform pain for an audience. I refuse to make my humiliation public entertainment." Her voice did not tremble. That steadiness unsettled her friends more than tears would have. They reached the corner where Sarah had parked her car. The skyline loomed above them, glittering indifferent. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to imagine another version of this night, one where Daniel arrived late with an apology and flowers, one where the contract she secured was the headline of her marriage instead of a footnote. That version dissolved quickly. What remained was sharper, more honest. She had ignored her instincts for months because she believed endurance was strength. Now she understood something different. Clarity was strength. "I need to go home," she said finally. "Alone?" Emily asked. "Yes, there are things I need to see with my own eyes." They exchanged glances, but did not argue. They had known Sarah since college. They recognized the shift in her tone. This was not grief leading her, it was strategy. The drive back to her condo felt surreal. The city lights blurred against the windshield as her thoughts accelerated. Shock had already begun transforming into calculation. Daniel did not know she had seen him. That gave her time. Time to gather truth without interference. Time to observe without his performance. At a red light, she stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. No tears, no smudged mascara, just a woman who looked composed, almost distant. She barely recognized herself. When she pulled into the underground garage, the silence pressed in around her. The building security guard nodded politely, unaware that the woman walking past him had just watched her marriage fracture in real time. Upstairs, the condo was immaculate as always. Clean counters, dim lights, the faint scent of Daniel's cologne lingering in the hallway. She slipped off her heels and stood still in the center of the living room, listening to the quiet. Her gaze moved toward Daniel's home office. The door was slightly ajar. A laptop sat on the desk, closed, ordinary. For a moment, she hesitated, not because she feared what she would find, but because she understood that once she opened it, there would be no return to denial. This was the line. She stepped forward anyway. Her fingers brushed the desk surface where his phone charger lay coiled. She remembered how just 2 weeks ago he had snapped at her for moving it. "You are overthinking," he had said then. Maybe she had been underthinking. Maybe she had chosen trust over evidence because it felt noble. Tonight, nobility felt naive. Sarah sat in his chair and placed her hand on the laptop. The screen reflected her face faintly in the dark glass. Somewhere across the city, Daniel was still laughing with the woman in red, unaware that the silence he depended on had shifted. He believed she would wait confused and hurt for his explanation. He underestimated her. She lifted the lid. The screen flickered to life, and the truth began to glow. The password had not changed. That hurt more than if it had. Sarah typed the familiar sequence of letters and dates. The ones Daniel once claimed represented the foundation of their life together, and the screen opened without resistance. For a moment, she simply stared at the desktop, at the ordinary icons and muted wallpaper, at the calm digital surface concealing months of deception. The betrayal was not hidden behind complexity. It was hidden behind assumption. He had assumed she would never look. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she opened his email. The inbox loaded slowly, and then the name appeared. Megan Parker, again and again. Subject lines that were deceptively professional at first glance. Revised forecast, client dinner recap, market projections. But when she clicked one open, the tone shifted immediately. "I cannot stop thinking about tonight." The message glowed on the screen like a confession. Her breath caught, but she did not look away. The correspondence stretched back nearly 8 months. 8 months of layered lies built between business jargon and coded affection. The early emails were cautious, restrained, threaded with plausible deniability. Then they evolved. Private jokes. Shared frustrations about spouses who did not understand ambition. Subtle flirtation that hardened into intimacy. Attached receipts followed. Boutique hotel reservations. Upscale restaurants in neighborhoods Daniel claimed he never visited. One invoice showed a weekend in Napa Valley during what he had told Sarah was a mandatory leadership retreat in Denver. She felt something inside her go unnervingly still. The first wave of pain had passed. What remained was cold clarity. She opened their joint banking app, next cross-referencing dates, amounts, locations. The transactions aligned with brutal precision. He had financed his betrayal from the same account where her bonus checks were deposited. The irony burned. A sound echoed in the hallway. The front door unlocking. Daniel was home. It was 12:43 in the morning. Sarah did not close the laptop. She did not move from his chair. She folded her hands together and waited. His footsteps were light, almost casual, until he saw the glow from the office. He paused in the doorway, confusion flickering across his face before he masked it with a tired smile. "You are still awake," he said, loosening his tie. "Big night, huh?" She studied him carefully, memorizing the details. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar. The slight tension in his jaw when his eyes dropped to the open screen. "Sit down," Sarah said quietly. Something in her voice stripped away his rehearsed ease. He stepped inside slower now, gaze darting to the laptop. "What is going on?" he asked, though he already knew. She rotated the screen toward him. Megan Parker. Read it. He did not sit. He scanned the email visible on the screen color draining from his face in incremental stages. It is not what it looks like, he said, automatically the sentence arriving too quickly, too polished. The words sounded practiced, as though he had imagined this confrontation before and prepared a defense. Sarah laughed softly, the sound devoid of humor. It looks exactly like what it is. 8 months of hotel reservations. 8 months of lies. 8 months of you telling me you were building our future while building something else entirely. Her voice did not rise, but it sharpened. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. You have been distant, Sarah. Always working, always chasing the next contract. I felt invisible. The audacity of it almost impressed her. He was repositioning himself as the neglected party, as though loneliness justified deceit. Invisible, she repeated. I have been working because we agreed on goals. Because you said we wanted the same things. You do not get to rewrite our history to excuse your choices. He stopped pacing. His tone shifted, desperation bleeding through. It just happened. It got complicated. I was going to end it. Sarah stood, then slowly meeting him at eye level. You were not going to end it, she said. You were going to continue until you were caught. Silence expanded between them, thick and suffocating. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's shoulders sagged, the performance cracking. I do not want to lose you, he said finally. We can fix this. Therapy, whatever you want. Sarah felt the weight of his words and realized something unexpected. She was not angry in the way she thought she would be. She was not hysterical. She was not broken. She was done. I do not want you to choose me because you are afraid of consequences, she said. I wanted you to choose me when it mattered. She walked past him toward the bedroom, opening the closet with deliberate calm. He followed, panic sharpening his movements. What are you doing? Packing. For how long? As long as I need to remember who I am without you. She placed essentials into a suitcase, movements precise, almost clinical. Each folded garment felt symbolic, a piece of identity reclaimed. Daniel stood helplessly in the doorway, watching the life he had taken for granted begin to dismantle itself. When she zipped the suitcase closed, the sound was final. She paused, looking at him one last time. You did not just break my trust, she said quietly. You revealed who you are when no one is watching. And then she walked out, leaving him alone in the echo of his own choices. The hotel room felt sterile, almost indifferent, as though heartbreak were a routine guest that checked in nightly and left without complaint. Sarah stood by the window overlooking the Chicago River, suitcase unopened on the edge of the bed coat still draped around her shoulders. The city moved beneath her in restless streams of headlights and ambition, unaware that somewhere above it a woman had just dismantled her marriage with quiet precision. For the first time since the restaurant, her composure cracked. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a slow exhale that trembled on its way out. She did not cry for Daniel. That realization surprised her. The tears that threatened were not for the man who had betrayed her, but for the version of herself who had ignored her instincts. The woman who believed endurance was love. The woman who mistook silence for strength. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed and pressed her palms against her eyes, not to hide, but to steady herself. The room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic below, a reminder that life continued whether she felt ready or not. Her phone vibrated. Emily. Are you safe? Sarah typed back. Yes, just thinking. Lauren followed with a message moments later. We are with you. Always. She stared at those words longer than necessary. Support felt different now. It was no longer comfort, it was fuel. She understood something with piercing clarity. She had not been abandoned, she had been underestimated. The next morning she rose before sunrise. There was no dramatic collapse, no day lost to grief. Instead, there was ritual, a shower that washed away the scent of Daniel's cologne still clinging to her skin, a fresh blouse, a controlled breath before looking at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, but there was something new behind them. Resolve. She opened her laptop and began reviewing her calendar for the week. Meetings, strategy sessions, a keynote panel in Boston in 3 days. Life had not paused. Neither would she. At the Boston Marketing Summit, the ballroom buzzed with industry leaders and rising talent. Sarah stood backstage waiting for her panel posture, steady mind sharp. She could have canceled. She could have retreated. Instead, she stepped into the light when her name was announced. The applause that greeted her felt distant at first, then grounding. As she spoke about market volatility and digital transformation, her voice did not waver. In fact, it carried a new edge, a clarity forged in personal upheaval. Pain had refined her. After the session, a woman approached her with calm authority and discerning eyes. Margaret Collins, 48, founder of one of the most influential consulting firms in the region. "I have been following your work for years," Margaret said, extending her hand. "You speak like someone who has survived something." Sarah almost smiled. "Maybe I have." Margaret studied her for a moment longer than polite society usually allowed. "Good. Survival builds vision, and vision builds empires." They had coffee that afternoon that stretched into something deeper than networking. Margaret spoke openly about her own divorce 15 years earlier, about the humiliation, the rebuilding, the unexpected freedom. "The worst thing that happened to me became the most clarifying," she said. "It forced me to stop negotiating my worth." The sentence struck Sarah with quiet force. Negotiating my worth. Had she been doing that inside her marriage? Compromising boundaries for the illusion of stability. When Sarah returned to Chicago, she did not return to the condo. She signed a short-term lease on a modern apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, smaller but entirely hers. The first night she stood in the empty living room surrounded by unopened boxes, she did not feel loss. She felt possibility. Daniel texted repeatedly apologies layered with promises. Therapy, change, regret. She read each message without responding. 3 days later, she filed for legal separation. The decision did not feel like defeat. It felt like alignment. Daniel had believed she would crumble, that shock would weaken her. Instead, it had sharpened her. She was no longer reacting. She was choosing. And in that choice lay the first true breath she had taken in months. By the time winter brushed Chicago in silver frost, Sarah no longer felt like someone recovering. She felt like someone ascending. The separation papers had moved through legal channels with clinical efficiency, each signature another thread cut cleanly from a tapestry she no longer wished to preserve. Daniel continued to send messages at irregular hours, long paragraphs heavy with regret, promises of therapy, declarations of sudden clarity. She read none of them twice. The woman who once searched his tone for reassurance now searched contracts for leverage and opportunity. It was at a technology investment forum in San Francisco that she met Nathan Reynolds. He was 39, founder of a rapidly expanding venture capital firm that specialized in scaling emerging digital platforms. Unlike the men who dominated rooms with volume, Nathan commanded attention with stillness. He listened longer than he spoke. He asked questions that were surgical rather than superficial. During Sarah's presentation on adaptive branding strategies in unstable markets, she noticed him in the second row, not smiling, not nodding, simply observing with sharp, assessing eyes. Afterward, he approached her without pretense. Your projection on tariff impact was conservative, he said calmly. Most analysts are overly optimistic right now. Sarah tilted her head, slightly intrigued rather than defensive. Conservative keeps companies alive, she replied. Reckless confidence buries them. The corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. Good. I prefer builders over gamblers. Their conversation extended past the polite limits of conference etiquette. They debated growth models, dissected failed acquisitions, challenged each other's assumptions with intellectual precision. There was no flirtation in his tone, no performance of charm. Instead, there was respect. Daniel had once admired her ambition until it threatened his own. Nathan seemed energized by it. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed intentionally. Strategy calls became collaborative sessions. A consulting opportunity evolved into partnership discussions. Nathan invited her to advise on a portfolio expansion for a sustainable tech startup, valuing her insight as essential rather than auxiliary. When he asked her to dinner one evening overlooking the bay, his words were measured. I would like to know you beyond spreadsheets, he said. No pressure, no expectations. Sarah surprised herself by not retreating. She had expected fear to accompany any new connection. Instead, she felt grounded. She was not seeking rescue. She was not filling absence. She was evaluating alignment. During dinner, she spoke openly about rebuilding, about learning that independence was not isolation, but integrity. Nathan listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded once. I am not interested in saving anyone, he said quietly. I am interested in standing beside someone who does not need saving. Meanwhile, Daniel requested one final meeting. They met at a quiet park near her new apartment. He looked thinner, older, stripped of the arrogance that once insulated him. I ended it with Megan, he said immediately. It was a mistake. I was lost. Sarah studied him without anger. Why did you end it? She asked calmly. Because you realized it was wrong, or because you realized I was leaving. His silence answered before his words did. You are different now, Daniel said finally. Stronger. Colder. No, she corrected softly. Clearer. When she walked away from him that afternoon, there was no dramatic farewell, no lingering attachment. The past felt smaller than she had imagined. Ahead of her, the skyline shimmered in winter light, sharp and uncompromising. She understood something profound as she stepped forward into her own momentum. Betrayal had not diminished her. It had refined her. And refinement, she realized, was a form of power. 6 months after filing for separation, Sarah no longer felt like she was rebuilding. She felt established, as if the earthquake had revealed bedrock instead of ruin. Her promotion to Director of Strategic Marketing was announced on a Monday morning, and the applause in the glass-walled conference room sounded different this time. It was not polite recognition. It was earned respect. Colleagues who once underestimated her composure now watched her with a measured awareness, understanding that the quiet woman in tailored suits possessed a mind that could outmaneuver markets and men alike. Her new office overlooked Lake Michigan, the winter ice fracturing along the shoreline like something breaking and reforming all at once. She stood by the window after the announcement, fingertips resting lightly against the glass, reflecting on the irony. Daniel had once suggested she scale back, that ambition was exhausting. Now her ambition felt oxygen-rich, expanding rather than draining. She had not become colder as he had accused. She had become precise. There was no excess emotion clouding her judgment, no negotiation of self-worth disguised as compromise. Nathan's presence in her life had grown steadily, never rushed, never imposed. Their relationship unfolded with deliberate patience anchored in conversation and shared vision rather than spectacle. He visited Chicago more often, sometimes arriving unannounced with coffee in hand. sometimes joining her at industry events, where they moved not as display, but as equals. He did not overshadow her, he amplified her. In private moments, when vulnerability surfaced like a cautious tide, he never tried to fix it. He listened, and that listening felt revolutionary. One evening after a long strategy session that extended past midnight, they stood alone in her office overlooking the dark water. The city lights shimmered against the surface like scattered constellations. "I have admired you for a long time," Nathan said quietly, his voice stripped of corporate cadence. "Not because you survived something painful, but because you refused to let it shrink you." Sarah held his gaze, measuring not his words but their intention. "I am not the same woman I was a year ago," she replied. "I know," he said. "You are better." Daniel attempted one final gesture weeks later, sending a handwritten letter delivered to her building. The envelope was thick-heavy with apology and nostalgia. She opened it out of courtesy rather than curiosity. The words spoke of regret, of therapy sessions, of lessons learned too late. At the bottom, he wrote that he would always love the woman she used to be. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. He loved who she had been when she was easier to contain. That realization carried no bitterness, only clarity. Spring approached with tentative warmth. Sarah accepted an invitation to deliver a keynote address at a national marketing summit in New York. As she stepped onto the stage before hundreds of executives, the spotlight did not intimidate her. It revealed her. She spoke not only about adaptive strategy and economic uncertainty, but about resilience, about recalibrating when systems fail, about the necessity of walking away from what diminishes you. The audience rose in a standing ovation that felt less like applause and more like acknowledgement. Backstage, Nathan waited, pride unmasked in his expression. "You were extraordinary," he said simply. Sarah smiled, not because she needed validation, but because she recognized truth when she heard it. In that moment, surrounded by noise and light, she understood something profound. The betrayal that once threatened to define her had instead refined her. She had been underestimated by a husband who mistook steadiness for weakness. Now the world saw what he failed to see. She was not rebuilding from loss. She was expanding from truth. 1 year later, Sarah Mitchell stood once again in front of the same restaurant where everything had changed. The evening air carried the familiar scent of the river and polished pavement, and the soft glow from the restaurant windows spilled onto the sidewalk exactly the way it had that night. For a moment she paused outside the entrance, her reflection faint in the glass. The woman staring back looked stronger, sharper, almost unfamiliar in her calm confidence. The last time she stood here, her world had fractured quietly behind a glass of wine and a stranger's laughter. Tonight she had returned not to remember pain, but to celebrate transformation. Nathan stepped beside her, his presence steady and unforced, a quiet gravity she had come to trust. His hand brushed hers naturally, fingers interlocking without hesitation. Inside the restaurant hummed with the same polished energy she remembered. Candlelight flickered across white linen tables, and the murmur of conversation floated through the air like distant music. Yet everything felt different, because she was different. She was no longer the woman scanning the room for reassurance, measuring her worth against a husband's attention. She walked forward with a composure built from clarity. They were there to celebrate a milestone that once would have seemed impossible. 6 months earlier, Sarah had launched her own consulting firm, Mitchell Strategic Group, a bold leap that startled even her closest colleagues. With Nathan as her first investor and Margaret Collins advising from the sidelines, the firm had grown faster than anyone predicted. That week, they had secured their largest contract, yet a multinational campaign valued at over $20 million. The deal had placed Sarah at the center of the industry she once navigated quietly from within corporate walls. As they were seated near the window, Sarah's eyes briefly drifted toward a table across the room. The exact spot where Daniel had once sat with Megan Parker. For a fleeting second, the memory replayed itself like a distant film reel, the tilt of his chair, the careless intimacy of his smile. But the emotional weight that once lived in that memory had evaporated. What remained was perspective. That moment had not been the destruction of her life. It had been the revelation of its true direction. Nathan noticed the shift in her gaze. "You okay?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting with quiet honesty. "Better than okay. I was just realizing how strange life can be. Sometimes the worst night of your life is simply the first chapter of the best one." Nathan smiled, understanding more than she needed to explain. He had watched her rebuild not through revenge or bitterness, but through discipline and purpose. Halfway through dinner, her phone vibrated softly against the table. A message from Emily. "Just saw Daniel's post online. Engagement announcement with Megan Parker. Are you all right?" Sarah read the words once, then again, not because they hurt, but because they felt so distant from who she had become. She typed a short response. "I am more than all right. I am free." She placed the phone down and lifted her glass. Nathan raised his in silent question. "To new beginnings," Sarah said. But as the crystal touched with a clear, ringing note, she realized the phrase was incomplete. This was not just a new beginning. It was the arrival of the life she had once postponed for the sake of maintaining something that was already broken. Outside the window, the city stretched endlessly into the night, a constellation of lights against dark water. Sarah caught her reflection again in the glass, and for a moment she studied the woman she had become. The journey from that first quiet betrayal to this evening of triumph had not been simple. It had demanded courage she did not know she possessed. It had forced her to confront illusions, dismantle comfort, and rebuild her identity piece by piece. Yet in that reflection she saw something beautiful. Not perfection, not invulnerability, but strength that had been earned rather than inherited. Daniel had once believed she was too composed, too steady, too predictable to ever walk away. That had been his greatest miscalculation. What he mistook for passivity had always been patience. What he mistook for dependence had always been discipline. Nathan reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers again with quiet certainty. Sarah felt warmth settle through her chest, not the fragile warmth of validation, but the steady glow of alignment. She had chosen herself, and that choice had reshaped everything. As they finished dinner and stepped back onto the Chicago sidewalk, the night air felt lighter than it had a year before. The river moved quietly beneath the bridges, carrying reflections of the city forward in shimmering lines. Sarah paused once more before walking away, glancing back at the restaurant entrance. That place had once witnessed the moment her marriage ended. Tonight it witnessed something far more powerful. The moment she understood that losing the wrong person had been the beginning of finding the right life. Stories like Sarah Mitchell's are more than emotional narratives about betrayal. From a psychological and leadership perspective, they reveal something deeper about human resilience and identity. When trust collapses, most people instinctively focus on loss. But experts in behavioral psychology often point out that moments of disruption can act as powerful catalysts for self-realignment. What we see in Sarah's journey is not simply recovery from betrayal. It is a transformation driven by clarity, boundaries, and self-worth. The turning point was not when she discovered the affair. The real turning point was when she chose dignity over reaction and growth over resentment. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps us continue sharing powerful stories about strength, resilience, and personal transformation. And before you go, leave a comment with a short phrase that captures the heart of this journey. Type, "Choose yourself."